Okay. Good evening, members, and members joining us online, and any members of the public. Just a reminder that the meeting is being recorded, but I now make it 6:01, so we'll begin. Welcome to the executive on the 15th of February. Okay. Do we have any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chairman. There are no apologies.
Thank you. Okay. Minutes of the previous meeting held on the 25th of January. Councillor Alloway. Okay. Is Councillor Alloway actually online? Oh, you are. Sorry. I see you, Councillor Alloway. Your hand is up.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Leader. I just wanted to raise a point with these minutes. I was a little disappointed to see that during the discussion on the Surrey Heath physical activity...
Sorry, Councillor Alloway, can I just stop you just for a second?
Yeah.
Everybody can hear me okay in here from the speaker thing. So I don't know, can I just ask Councillor Bates, can you hear Councillor Alloway perfectly clearly? You can, yeah?
No, others are shaking.
Oh, right, okay, so there's a few heads shaking. So Councillor Alloway, what it is we can barely hear you. You're clear, but we can barely hear you in the room. So I'm going to ask you to virtually shout your point, if that's okay. Okay, over to you. We definitely can't hear you because you're muted.
Muted.
There you go.
How's that? Is that a bit better? Okay, switched microphones. Okay. Yes, I'll start again. Yeah, thank you, Leader. I just wanted to mention I was a little bit disappointed that the minutes didn't reflect the points I raised on the Surrey Heath physical activity strategy. I raised 3 or 4 points which I thought were worthy of being recorded in the minutes, and if nothing else, so that my residents can see that I have raised these issues for them, and these are the responses. I've got the text, and if it's agreeable, I'd like to send that over so that at least just a couple of sentences summary could appear in the minutes in respect of the Surrey Heath physical activity strategy, please.
Okay, I think I've got no problem with that. The minutes are excellent, as usual, but they don't capture everything that was said by everybody, as you understand. What I would just say is, can you give us, say, the 2 main points? I'm happy for you to send the text over and that to be in the minutes of this meeting, but can you just say a couple of the points, because then that way you introduce them at this meeting and they'll be in this minute. Okay,
yeah, so the strategy didn't include facility for pedestrians to access activity venues by way of ensuring footpaths are clear. So even getting to bus stops, it's very difficult for especially the elderly or people with mobility devices or wheelchairs to get to locations if they're faced with cars blocking footpaths. There are a number of council departments, functions, where we could focus on some proposals that would at least help encourage a reduction in this occurrence of blocked footpaths, which would make activity more accessible to people and contribute to the desire to get people physically active.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Alloway. Right, so what if you send those minutes in to me or to Rachel, I'm fine with that. We'll do a summary for these minutes, okay? And the fact that you've raised those couple of points in this minute means we will be able to put them in the minutes of this meeting. Okay?
Perfect, thank you.
All right. Okay, members, are there any other points on the minutes of the previous meeting? No. Are you happy for me to sign them then? Okay. Okay. Right. Do we have any declarations of interest in anything we're going to be discussing this evening? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up, so okay, thank you. All right, do we have any questions for myself as leader or any of the portfolio holders? Councillor Alloway?
Yeah, sorry to hog this tonight, but question for the Planning and Places portfolio holder, my fellow ward councillor. I just wondered if you could look into the functionality of the pre-application, planning pre-application inquiries process. We have had a significant pre-application inquiry that, according to the Excel workbook, occurred in June 2021, but didn't appear on the workbook until mid-October. And the workbook appears to be being backfilled, in which case, certainly the application in this ward, the pre-apps application in this ward was missed, and it is a significant one. So in the spirit of ward councillors being made aware of such pre-application requests, in order for us to A, be aware, but two, contribute appropriately, this process is, I think, unsound in making sure that ward councillors are aware by the backfilling element. So the date a application for pre-app discussion is made, it should go on that week's spreadsheet and not backfilled when it apparently becomes valid.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Alloway. Councillor Page, do you want to pick up on that?
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Alloway, if you'd like to send me the details, I think this is something that we look just outside of this particular forum, but I take your point, and if you've got something there that we need to look at, grateful if you ping me the details, and I'll work with Gavin Chania and see if we can get you an answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If I understood that correctly, it's the point was about it was being backfilled rather than being introduced at the time of the time, but I'm sure you can look at that. That's fine, good. Okay, Councillor Wheeler, you have a question?
Thank you, yeah, thank you, Leader. It's actually really a supplementary question on the background of Councillor Alloway's question to with reference to the pre-planning application advice. The reason this was hard fought and introduced was so that ward councillors could be consulted in terms of pre-application advice meetings and to have involvement with that. And it came about as something that is within our constitution for us to do. It is something that we're meant to be involved in. So actually, it's just to reiterate that it's very disappointing. Obviously, Councillor Alloway has looked at one thing. I have to say I'm now at the stage where I'm wondering whether or not it's necessary for us all to go back and look at every single one of those things. And I think it's really unfortunate if we are back entering. What I would suggest that we do in the interim is to ask the officers to let us know how many pre-application advice matters have been entered retrospectively within the appropriate tab, so that as ward councillors we can do our duty by residents to actually look at these matters. I think it's really disappointing that this has happened, and I'm really hoping that it's an isolated instance, and I'm hoping that we can have assurance from that from the head of planning. Okay.
We don't want any member to be disappointed. I found on many occasions that it's about the process and whether we know what's happening, etc. So I think Councillor Page has said we'll take that. You'll get the information from Councillor Alloway with that example, and as always, we'll come back but we'll come back to every member of the council, not just the people who are on the meeting today. Okay, and then we can take it from there. All right. Are there any other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Okay. Right, we'll go into the first agenda item then, the revenue budget and medium-term financial strategy. Members, the budget is always multi-layered and complex, as you can see by the agenda. I know that Councillor Perry and Mr. Watson have been working very hard on trying to make everything much more we use the word transparent, but I would actually, in this case, use the word understandable, so that the information's always been there. Just sometimes you need the code to understand it, and we're trying to decode it. So I think, Councillor Perry, you're going to tackle this in a slightly different way from the way we've done it in the past. All right. So over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Very good. So we're going to be asking for approval of the medium-term financial strategy and all the associated papers that go with it. As members are aware, the Council is required to set its annual budget in February of each year, and is also required as best practice to have an up-to-date medium-term financial strategy, which covers the next 4 years, which includes the general fund revenue estimate for 22, that's the next year's budget, with details of any increases in expenditure or reductions in income expected, and details of any reductions in costs or increases in revenue income that may be expected and which are reflected in the budget. The strategy also provides details of the borough's current financial reserves. Further details are provided with the agenda items 5, 6 and 7 that you have, but I will summarise the main issues. As a nation, we have suffered and are still suffering the impact of a pandemic not seen before in our lifetimes. It has resulted in massive lockdowns, forced changes to work patterns, enforced retail closures, and it has accelerated a change occurring in the shopping patterns in our high streets. These changes have all combined to have a negative impact on our financial performance in the last 2 years. This current financial year is currently estimated to end with a deficit of approximately 1.6 million, albeit that a significant effort is being made to minimise this over the remaining few months of the year. When setting the budget for 22-23, we are faced with increases to costs due to inflation, increased demand, and reductions in income and government grants. As well as this, the budget has also had to take account of the longer-term impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. After taking these factors into account and incorporating a range of improved efficiencies and savings whilst maintaining services as per the 21-22 year and setting those costs against our income from council tax, business rates, etc., we're still left with a gap of £2.54 million. Thanks to the prudent financial management of past councils, we do have significant financial reserves, and we've been able to use part of those to bridge the gap during the next year. I'll now hand over to Mr. Bob Watson, our Chief Financial Officer and Section 151 Officer, who will give you a short summary of the medium-term financial strategy and the budget proposals for this next year.
Thank you very much, Councillor. There is a slide pack presentation, which I believe will certainly be on the screens. Good, thank you very much. What we're going to talk about here is the overall medium-term financial strategy, which incorporates the revenue budget and revenue estimates for the next financial year and the indicative forecast for the following 3 years, a 4-year capital strategy and programme, a bit about the council tax, and just to let you know, there's also a Treasury management strategy involved in the medium-term financial strategy. As part of the transparency agenda, I feel it's probably right to explain some terms that we use in local government finances that may be different to the private sector way of doing accounts. So when we refer to the term revenue, this is the day-to-day expenditure of the council. It's limited to the annual year budget, and it doesn't mean just income, it's expenditure and income at the same time. The opposite side to revenue is capital expenditure. This is where the council invests in assets that are there to support its services to residents and businesses that last for more than 12 months and actually are deemed to be a tangible asset you can look at. So moving on to the next slide. There's some principles we have used when we set this medium-term financial strategy. And the key one to remember is that we're now looking at the impact of the COVID pandemic as an ongoing scenario. I think the days when people thought it'd be a 6-month blip and return to what we had before have gone. It's now something we're learning to live with as a nation, and therefore our budgets are designed to reflect this going forward, particularly in the impact on our levels of income that we receive over the next 4 years or so. The idea, as Councillor Perry mentioned, is that we have a budget deficit that we are clearing out. And it's the idea to try and do it progressively rather than a big bang of service reductions to the public. We're trying to do it smoothly as we can using our reserves. So it's a progressive return to what we would class as a balanced budget, where our expenditure and income are matched. To do that, we do have to make use of the reserves we have. And as Councillor Perry mentioned earlier, the Council has, through its previous prudent financial management, built up a fairly sustainable and strong level of reserves. Potentially, we almost have 3 years' worth of cover on reserves to our annual budget, and there are many, many councils in the country that do not have that level of reserve cover. Some of them probably do not have enough to make a 1-year reserve cover. So please be aware the council is in a very strong financial position in terms of reserve balances. But that's not to say we just rely on reserves, because we can't do that. It's not sustainable to just keep taking money out of the reserves without replenishing them or setting a balanced budget. So we have to do a process where we deliver service efficiencies from the budgets, and we look at how we can generate income in a more sustainable and commercial way, things going forward. But again, it takes time for that to come in and to build through. Part of what we're doing that by is a root and branch review of the service areas, what they deliver as outputs, what resources they need to those outputs, which will give us an idea potentially of, are we delivering the right things? Are we delivering things we should be delivering? And have we got sufficient staffing and other resource to make sure that we can deliver that? And that with an appropriate level of challenge coming through, and a bit more of that in a bit. Next slide is. So we've had to make some assumptions around this as we're trying to build up the council's budget going forward. There's the impact on the income levels that's going to happen, but we do believe, as officers of the council, that we will start to see a change in the level of income returns the council is going to make. We've built a budget this year that takes us to what we believe the low point of our income available coming through, and the budget will, as you see it, will slowly start to build back up those levels of income that we have lost due to the pandemic. However, it's probably going to be a long, long time before we return to pre-pandemic levels in things like car park income and some of the income from the retail assets that we hold for regeneration and employment protection purposes. We have put some growth in line for the council tax and the business rates that is related to the government's assessment of our core spending power. Each year when the government does its local government finance settlement, it makes an assessment for every single local authority of how much spending power they think they're going to have. And the assumptions they make around it is around the level of business rates that you will be able to retain, and also the level of council tax that you will set and be able to achieve. And for this financial year, the core spending power assessment by the government assumes we will take the maximum increase in council tax that we're allowed to take without triggering a referendum locally. We're also going to look at our current capital programme around this. The reason being is that people will be well aware that the construction industry, development industries have seen real increases in terms of labour cost and material cost. And I know people talk about inflation running about 7% potentially. The already seen 35% increases in labour costs and material costs in the construction industry. Part of it's driven by the price being driven up by a shortage of supply and market forces taking effect, where the big developers will probably outbid most local authorities in terms of getting hold of materials and also getting hold of staffing resources. Sorry, a minute. And then finally, in order to set the budget where we're going to go and make sure we're sustainable over the 4-year period, there's a need to repurpose some of our earmark reserves into the general fund balance. And this paper agenda item is asking that we can repurpose up to, and I say it's up to, 7.5 million of our earmark reserves at this point in time, just to make sure we have a sustainable 4-year plan that leaves the council with a general fund balance at the end of it that keeps us in a secure and safe financial position. Next slide, please. So here is a summary of what is in the budget. These are all in the papers, and this is just basically taking our net budget at the start of the year. This is the budget that we always start off with. It's called the rollover budget or standstill budget, and it's the budget we would set if we did nothing other than take out the one-off growth and savings items from the previous year. We then add on to that the items of budgetary growth that have been identified by officers, and these amount to nearly £4.8 million. It is all detailed in the reports in Appendix 1-1 of the medium-term financial strategy. But there are some significant numbers in there, firstly around the reduction in our commercial income because of the COVID pandemic. There's a reduction in our car parks income, again, reduced footfall in the car parks from the pandemic and the ongoing impact. And those of you will all be aware that we have not been collecting the garden waste for the past few months. In order to compensate residents for those that signed up to the scheme, we'll be offering rebates in the next financial year, and the cost of that is about £300,000 we're estimating in the budget. The good news around that one, budget-wise, is that that is only a 1-year impact, and next year it will return to the normal budget and levels of income coming through. We have in there also some increased contractual costs, and we have the impact of the 1.25% in national insurance. That's not just hitting employees, it hits the employers as well. And we pay that amount of money across there at some point. Also, councillors will be aware that we did set an annual plan towards the end of the last calendar year as part of the 5-year strategy of the council, and we built money into the budget to make sure we deliver on those priorities that are set out in that 5-year strategy. And for next year, we've included £125,000 worth of growth into the budgets. Offsetting that, we put in service efficiencies, and they total about 2.4 million. And again, the details are on that. Looking to the right-hand side of the slide, you will see how we get finance to support the budget. And we have nearly £12 million of various financing sources. The primary source of finance for the council is its council tax. And we're heavily dependent on our council taxpayers to help us deliver the services we require for them. Coming up to the bottom corner on the right-hand side, it shows the 2.55 budget gap that Councillor Perry mentioned earlier. Thank you. So what we're moving into here on this slide is just basically the summary of where we're going for the next 4 years. And again, it's contained in Appendix 1 of the papers tonight on item 5, and it shows that we have a budget pressure of nearly, or budget revenue budget nearly 15 million in the next financial year through management of efficiencies, growth and items. We're bringing that down to nearly under 13 million by the end of the medium-term financial strategy period in 25-26. And you can see at the bottom line there how that budget requirement we take from balances it drops from 2.5 million to just over £300,000. And the next slide will show us the graph, giving you that in a pictorial form, because it's always easier to look at graphs. And next slide, please. Just moving on to the capital. I know it's a separate agenda item, but I'll cover it here so you don't get too much of me talking all night. We have reduced the capital programme over the next 4 years, and it's a capital programme that we can now fund from our receipts reserve. So there's no requirement for any new borrowing on the programme. However, saying that, we are rephasing potentially 8.5 million of the current capital programme. Most of that will be funded from borrowing going forward. But again, this is subject to the review of what we contain in the programme and where we can, projects no longer become viable or the viability assessments change due to increasing costs. And what we now know from the original business case, we will look at whether those projects need to be put on hold or potentially even cancelled because they're no longer delivering the benefits and the viability we thought they might do. Thank you. So talking about the level of reserves we got, the council is allowed to use its reserves to smooth the impact of budget pressures on the local taxpayer. And this is what we're doing over the term of the medium-term financial strategy. And this graph just shows how our reserve levels started off in 2014-15, how the earmark reserves have built up to over 40 million by the end of the last financial year. And then obviously in 21-22, we're seeing a slight take from those reserves. And then we will potentially put the extra money into the general fund balance as we're requesting tonight. And that gives us a fairly sustainable level of earmark reserves over the 4 years of the strategy, but a slowly diminishing total of the general fund balance towards the end of it. And by 26-27, I'm very hopeful that we'll be in a position where we'll start to replenish our general fund balance from the budget that we set going forward. I think the key thing is you can see the size of the reserves we hold versus the actual drawdown from those reserves over the whole period and the last few years and the planned 4 years going forward. So moving on to our council tax, the proposal tonight is that we increase the council tax for the local residents for the Surrey Heath element by £5 for a Band D property. That obviously gets distributed slightly differently depending on the grading of your property. So those people in the Band A will pay less than £5 increase. Those people in the higher banded properties, G and H, will probably pay a lot more. And that equates to 2.19% increase on the council tax. So we are still within the limit for the referenda, in that we have to be either whatever is the greater of £5 or just under 2%. And in our case here, £5 is the greater amount, which is what we're proposing to increase the council tax by. Shown for information there as well, because obviously I know you will be asked by your residents, how much is the Surrey County Council precept going up? And that's going up by £77.31 for a Band D property, which represents a 4.99% increase for themselves. And Surrey Police is increasing theirs by £10, which is an absolute amount cap they were set to at £10, and that represents 3.5% on their previous year's precept. Thank you. And the good old favourite slide, just showing how much of the money that we collect in council tax actually is retained by Surrey Heath. The purple wedge of cheese, I can't tell you what that is in terms of Trivial Pursuit, but it's the one that shows Surrey Heath, and it shows that 11 pence in every pound, or 11% of the council tax, stays with us. Just worth pointing out that a £5 increase in council tax is under 10 pence a week for a Band D property. And for that, we deliver all the services that we deliver as a council. And final slide, I think. So in summary, as the council section 151 officer, I'm obliged to give an opinion on the sustainability of our reserves and the robustness of the budget estimates. We have been impacted by the pandemic, same as lots of other councils, but it's interestingly noted that the government assesses Surrey Heath as one of those councils that will bounce back far quicker than many other councils in the country. And the Chartered Institute of Public and Finance Accountants comes out and has said that we are very strong in their General Resilience Index, which is the index of resilience of councils based on their reserves and their budgets going forward. I can say that our budgets are and reserves are very strong, and the medium-term financial strategy gives us a pathway back to a balanced budget without any real major shock to the systems of higher increases in council tax or cuts to resident services going forward. And I can state that the estimates are both prudent, affordable and robust, and our reserve levels are very highly sustainable. I'll pass back now to Councillor Perry. Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Watson.
Sorry, Councillor Perry, just if you hold on just a second. Okay, so members and members of the public, just towards the end there, I was informed that if you were zooming into the meeting or you were YouTubing into the meeting, you couldn't actually see that presentation, which has got to be one of the most boring 15 minutes of your life then, staring at slides that didn't exist. All right, I sincerely apologise for that. We don't know what happened there. Members, they actually caught it towards the end. So it looks like we fixed it towards the end, but you didn't see the whole presentation. For members, it's slightly different. You will know, of course, that those slides were part of a full presentation on the budget that was given previously. So the information for members is available, and I'm hoping that you could decipher what Mr. Watson was talking about on the slides. For members of the public, whereas the leader had just espoused how great it was that we were now looking at understandable and transparency, and we can't show you the slides, what we're going to do is we will publish those slides as part of the minutes on the website so that everyone can see the presentation that was given this evening. And again, I apologise for the fact that that is retrospective rather than during the actual meeting. So, sorry, Councillor Perry, over to you just to finish off. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Well, first of all, thank you to Mr. Watson for that presentation. Hopefully it made much easier to understand the technicalities of what's happened here. We've had to face what has been a sudden and very large impact to our financial position, which has been caused by the pandemic. And luckily, our strong reserves have enabled us to work our way out of that and back to a really balanced budget in a fairly slower and controlled way than would have been possible had we not had those reserves. So the medium-term financial strategy is to work towards building a fully balanced budget without the use of reserves within that 4 or 5 years, and then thereafter to rebuild our reserves. The strategy assumes that we will have to continue drawing down for that 4 years. It also assumes that significant further savings and improved revenues can be achieved as a result of a detailed review of all borough activities, which will commence in March, which is not very far away. In total, as you've seen there, we currently have reserves of 44.2 million. Much of that is ring-fenced, and they are detailed by pot in item 5E on page 45 of the agenda. So, full details of everything we've discussed are in the agenda papers, but I'm very happy, and I'm sure Mr. Watson will be to answer any questions that may pop up there. Are there any questions?
Okay. Members, are there any questions for Councillor Perry on the papers? Councillor Bates.
Thank you. Yes, it was a bit unfortunate about the slides. Just so you know, the first slide that we saw happened to be the one on council tax. So I'm sure that members of the public would be delighted about that. Although I have to say it was slightly less kind of intrusive than watching the member of the executive picking their nose, which we were then inflicted to a few minutes later, but we'll watch that all on YouTube. In terms of the actual question I wanted to ask, I have raised this privately, which is regarding this £475,000 budget review for next year and 1.35 million going forward, described in the budget as zero-based budget review. And the question I suppose that I would ask, and I know members of the public would ask, and we'll certainly need an answer for by next week, is what does this actually consist of? Either we know what it is and we haven't said, or that figure is a guess. And I think it would be helpful over the next week, perhaps for members to understand which of those it may be, because obviously that is a very large amount of money, which at the moment isn't specified as to what that might be. And in addition to that, it's not clear as to how things like redundancy payments would actually be within that figure. So if we are talking about staffing, and I've no idea at this stage whether we are or whether we're not, I assume we probably are, then the issue of redundancies and things like that will obviously have to be relevant within that, because it wouldn't be the whole year. So I guess I'm pleading for some more information at this point in regard to that before I decide what I might be doing next Wednesday.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bates. And sorry that the first slide was one with, obviously an unpopular, but not quite as unpopular as what you saw later, apparently. Councillor Perry?
Councillor Bates, yes, by definition, we cannot exactly identify the savings that will be made, and they won't all be cost savings. They could be revenue increases, because the estimates have been made on the basis of the experience by our senior officers and senior members who've been through this process many times in many organisations. It's a fact when you conduct an exercise like this, zero-based budgeting, going right back to basics, asking what they're doing and how they're doing it, and could there be a better way of doing it, and what have you, does produce the sort of percentage savings that have been indicated here. We're all confident that these targets can be achieved, but we can't tell you exactly what they'll be until we do the exercise.
Thank you. Mr. Roberts?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Perry, and thank you for the question. So I think just to reinforce a few things. The first thing is that our new Director of Resources, our Section 151 officer, would not be putting his name to this budget if he didn't believe it was deliverable. I think it's quite right that most of the savings have already been identified. That's £2.4 million worth of efficiencies. And a further 475k is built into the budget. And this arises from discussions that we've been having with officers, with the Section 151 officer, with myself, about what we believe is a deliverable number, and we believe that is a deliverable number. Of course, members are going to be concerned about transparency, and so one of the things I can assure members is that, first of all, we are going to be progressing that work immediately once this budget has been put to bed, and that any proposals coming forward will be coming through the executive process. So members will have full transparency, will be able to ask whatever questions they wish, and if there are any service reductions or any staffing reductions, questions about redundancy costs and how any short-term costs are dealt with will be set out in those papers. Clearly at this stage, members, I can't say whether there will be reductions of that nature, because as you can imagine, our focus will continue to be on identifying as many efficiency savings as possible, and as a portfolio holder mentioned, any opportunities to increase income or invest to deliver savings in the medium term. All of those things will be under consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Councillor Bates, do you want to just come back? Sorry, Councillor Galliford. If I like to just finish off. If I get to give members an opportunity just to respond. Is it a response, Councillor Bates?
Yes, just briefly, because I appreciate we're going to be having further discussions over the next week on this. Look, no councillor can expect the in detail down to the pound and pence, but as we have had senior officers working through this organisation before, and we will have them after. So the question I've got to ask, I suppose, is, yes, I fully accept that the current Section 151 officer and current chief executive have stated what they have, but I do need more detail, I'm afraid, based on what I've heard so far. Now, it may be that you're talking about things such as shared services. It may be that you're talking about income generators, and indeed, I've mentioned before some areas around that we can think about, some of which may come up later on the meeting this week. But members of our local residents are going to wonder why there's a very large hole in our budget, and they will inevitably worry about it if we do not give at least some basic understanding as to what that might be. We've done it with other elements of the budget. We've indicated things in detail as to what they are. But the question is how I need a bit more reassurance as to why we think, based on the many, many years of experience of many, many officers and many, many experienced councillors, we can suddenly find £1.35 million over 4 years. And I'm happy for that to be sent to me privately if it helps, but I will need it by next Wednesday.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bates. Councillor Galliford.
Thank you. So we've been told with some confidence that we have 3 years' worth of reserves to cover any problems, but I'm wondering how we have calculated into that any prospective rising costs and inflation.
Okay. Councillor Perry?
Not quite sure what you mean there, Councillor. Obviously, inflation will affect both costs and income as we go forward. The revenue, so the reserves that we're planning to use to balance the budget are from our total fund of 40-odd million. So we have plenty more there if we absolutely need it to cover the balance. I'm not quite sure what your question means.
Can I have a go? Can I have a go?
Well, I can clarify. So basically what I'm asking is, although we've said we're very confident that we have 3 years worth of reserves, how confident? Well, that's what I heard.
Go on, Councillor Galliford, yeah.
So what I want to know is, how are we basically calculating into that any prospective rising costs and inflation? Because if costs and inflation rise higher than we might expect, or they haven't been calculated in, then we might only have 2 years worth of reserves. That's where I'm coming from.
Okay. I've got everybody wants to answer, but let me have a go first. Okay. I think during Mr. Watson's presentation, he talked about 3 years cover. He actually was referring to it as a ratio, that if you look at our reserves, it's about 3 times the cost of running the council with no income whatsoever. Right? It's not meant to be a factual, if every single income drops to 0, we could still run the council for 3 years just off the reserves. It was meant as an indication of strength, as opposed to a calculation of it is exactly 3 and it includes inflation, etc., Councillor Galliford. So I'm sorry if it wasn't come over as clearly, but it was meant as we have 3 years equivalent in the reserves of running the council. But I don't think anybody is thinking for a second that our income will drop to zero everywhere for the next 3 years. So it's probably more like, if you take it as, another way of putting it would be, there's about 40 million. We could take £2 million out of reserves for the next 20 years to run the council, would be another way of saying it. But it wasn't meant to be an accurate reflection of a calculation. It was simply just indicating the strength of the reserves. Does that help?
Well, kind of. So we've got 3 years, is what you're saying, roughly. No. If we have no income, we can cover it. But what about the rising costs in the meantime?
Let me put it this way. If our income drops to zero, so there's nobody parks in any cars, nobody goes to the theatre, and everybody stops paying their council tax, right? I think we're going to have bigger problems than whether inflation is running at 4% or 47%. Okay? It's not meant to be a calculation which shows that we are covered should our income drop to zero. It was just simply, we have 3 times as many reserves as our annual budget.
Based on present costs and...
Sure, based on present costs, yeah.
That's what I'm getting at. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, okay, where's that? Oh, Councillor Malvaganam, yeah.
Thank you, Leader. I did not want to disappoint you today. I have a fundamental problem with this, because maybe you can answer, or rather you answered, or Councillor Perry answered this question. We have lost 1.6 up to 6 months of the current financial year. And in your document, I have to refer this to your document, you actually refer to there is some focus coming for Q3, which is up to December. Do you have any idea what the deficit is going to be at the end of this year? Because you are still referring to 1.6 million we lost in for 6 months. So I presume there are going to be more losses. We won't have made any recovery, almost certain, because everything you have said so far has depended entirely on COVID, as you have all repeated it a few times now. And the second question I have for the leader and for the portfolio holder is, do you know what's the state of the opening balance of the balance sheet itself, the reserve? Because I have just looked up our website. It is still showing we've got 80 million pounds of revenue reserves. And here you're talking 30 million. Maybe you both the officer execs need to answer that one first, and then go on and answer the next one. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Perry?
Yeah, on the first question, the 1.6 million is not what the loss that's been incurred up to that point. It's the estimate of the annual position. So as I said, we're still looking at the end of the whole financial year to be 1.6, and hopefully less than that, because we're taking immediate action to try and mitigate the impact of the pandemic and what have you. So that's what that is. It's not an actual loss as up to Christmas. The reserves are, you've got a full list of all reserves in the pack. It's just over 40 million at the moment. And to answer Councillor Galloway's question there, we're only plenty of the 40 million that we've got. 7 million has been allocated to soften the blow over the next 4 years. So that's 7 out of 40 million. We're not spending all our reserves at all. So, we do have plenty of room for manoeuvre there if necessary. We obviously, when producing the estimates there for the next few years, we have built-in inflation, we have built-in increase of costs in all areas, and they're detailed on the schedule that you've got there. So, yes, we can't totally see what's going to come in the future, but that's our best estimate at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Perry. Can I just pick up on a point that Councillor Malvaganam made? He's looked at our website and said that it's showing reserves of 18 million. And we're 80 million, sorry. And we are giving a presentation where we're saying it's in the 40s, okay? Does someone have an immediate answer as to what that might be, or is that something we want to take offline and review? Mr. Watson?
Yes, the information on the website is potentially old information going back there, because obviously you're aware we haven't had the 1920 accounts signed off by our local district auditor. Once they're done, we will update the website with the balance positions, but the estimate we are using in the medium-term financial strategy is the best estimate we've got, and will be updated when we do our outturn report to the executive in the early months of the next financial year.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Councillor Malvaginam, do you want to just respond?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we for 1.5 years, we have seen an 80 million figure. Here we are, you are presenting us with a 34 million revenue reserves, or 40 million, or whatever it may be at this stage. I'm very confused. I mean, it is absolutely ridiculous for you all to drop a figure without any proper explanation as to what's going on. Councillor McLaughlin, you're the leader of the council. I'm sure you should know more than anyone else as to why this huge discrepancies has arisen between these two numbers. I mean, one is a public document. Here you are submitting another public document. I think you should take some responsibility here.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Malvaginam. I think what we've agreed to do is to look at the information that's on the website right now, and I'm happy to come back to you with where we believe there's a difference between what's showing there and what's showing now. Okay, I think it's being projected as somehow 40 million has disappeared, but as you and I both know, what it often is to do with is presentation. And when numbers are presented one way, they look like that, and presented another way, the same numbers are looking a different one. And you and I are both long enough in the tooth to know that that is much more likely than this council having been audited and audited and audited and checked many, many times, and having 151 officers who are professionals, that there is something that the implication of you're making is valid. So we'll come back to you. As we always do, if we can't answer immediately, we'll come back in writing within 7 days, and we'll answer everyone. All members will hear the answer. Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Bates.
Thank you. Yeah, Councillor Malvaginam's right, actually. I've literally just looked up myself. The document in question, I'm assuming the one he's talking about, are the draft financial statements ending the 31st of March 2020. And the figure he's referring to is on page 12, which says £80 million. So I'm assuming that's what he's actually referring to there. And if that is the case, it does seem a fair point he's making.
Okay, thank you. Okay, are there any other questions on the paper before the executive? Item 5. Okay, I'm not seeing any of you. No. Okay. So, Councillor Perry, we have a recommendation on item 5, page 9. Page 9, correct. Okay, you could go through it. Yeah, that's fine. Your microphone.
Right. The executive is advised to recommend to full council the approval of the medium-term financial strategy and associated revenue budget estimates covering the period 2022-2023 and to 2025 to 2026, which includes to approve the 22-23 budget estimates, giving a net cost of service revenue budget for the council of 14.788 million, as shown in Appendix 1 to the medium-term financial strategy, to approve the unavoidable service pressures of 4.791 million, shown in Appendix 1, and in more detail in Appendix 1.1 to the medium-term financial strategy, and 3, to approve the revenue efficiencies of 2.413 million, shown in Appendix 1 and in more detail in Appendix 1.2 to the medium-term financial strategy. It goes on and on and on to approve the recommendation of...
I might have done small 1, small 2, small 3, but you're halfway through, go for
you want me to read them all out? I mean, I think people have got them all in front of them. There's 4, 5, 6, and the executive is also advised to note capital strategy, small 1, small 2, small 3, small 4, small 5, and 6. Yes? Enough, or do you want more?
Okay.
It's all as per status, about 10 pages of it.
Okay. Okay, so, all right. So just in summary then, okay, the executive is asked to recommend to full council, small, as you've said, small 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and also advised to note small 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Members of the executive, are we agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Okay, we are on to item 6, Treasury Management Report. Councillor Perry.
Yeah, sorry about this, members. You got me most of it tonight. The council is required to agree its treasury management strategy on an annual basis, usually at the main council meeting, prior to the start of the financial year. The strategy can be found on pages 47 to 72 of the agenda, and it sets out the parameters under which the council's financial team will conduct its treasury activities. It shows, amongst other things, the borrowing and lending limits, counterparty limits, and the prudential indicators to operate within. All treasury investments are made with due regard to the security of public funds, the need for cash flow, liquidity, and finally the return on the investment yield on that priority. The executive is asked to recommend the strategy to council.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for Councillor Perry on item 6, Treasury Management Strategy Report? Okay, no. Okay. So, to spare your voice, Councillor Perry, all right. The executive is advised to approve and recommend to full council the adoption of small 1, 2, 3, 4, and note small 1 and 2 as in the paper. Are we agreed, members?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. All right. There's only a short break. Councillor Perry, item 7.
Item 7 is capital strategy 2022, 23 to 25, 26. Alongside the revenue budget, the council is also required to set its plans for capital expenditure. This is the longer-term investment in assets required to allow the council to maintain its services to residents and businesses. The strategy and capital programme are at item 7 on pages 73 to 92 of the agenda. The council has made significant capital investment over the past few years, and this programme represents a scaling back to those plans whilst the impact of current economic development becomes more apparent, and also to allow the council to complete its previous programme. Significantly, new programme is affordable and prudent and can be funded from existing resources without need for further borrowing. The executive is asked to recommend to council to approve both the capital strategy and the proposed expenditure programme for the period 2022-23 to 2025-26.
Okay, thank you. And again, are there any questions for Councillor Perry or myself? Councillor Bates.
Thank you. Yes, I've got a question which relates to page 86 of the report, where you've put down local plan provision for Gypsy Traveller and travelling show people sites, and it's being proposed to put in £500,000 in the year 23-24 and another £500,000 for 24-25. And I think to allocate that money is good. I'm happy to give credit where that's due. My question, though, is should that not be moved forward? Bearing in mind that we will have an enormous amount of pressure to find sites within the local plan, would it not be more sensible for the first tranche of that to come forward into the next financial year? At least one site. And it seems to me prudent to actually put that into the budget for this coming year, and maybe move those two forward. So actually have the £500,000 in 22-23 and another half in 23-24. We have to find sites quickly, and it seems to me that it makes sense to give the budget accordingly. So I'm not sure what the reasoning is for that. We don't need to wait for the local plan to actually do that. If that was the thinking, we need to get on with it now. And I would suggest that we might want to move those both forward into the next financial year. So move £500,000 into 2023 and keep the 23-24 one.
Thank you, Councillor Bates. When we were discussing this one at the budget, what we felt was that if any land or property became available, it was likely that the money would actually be spent in the following financial year. Now, that is not a case of it would take that long, but we felt it would take that long to actually identify land. Rather than change the paper or the budget and not know what the effects of that would be in terms of knock-on effect, I'm happy to leave it where it is with the assurance that should something come up where that money would be required in this financial year, then the executive, knowing the urgency of Gypsy and Traveller provision, particularly towards making the local plan sound, we would be very happy to bring that forward and spend that money to get that solution in place. So I hope that answers your question. But if it doesn't, do you want to come back? No. Okay, thank you. Okay, Councillor Malvaginam.
Thank you, Leader. I got a question on page 87 through to 88. My understanding, Leader, was that we had stopped or we were putting a brakes on all the capital expenditure regarding the regeneration or London Block Road, or is it just being rephased back into 22-23? Or have I got the wrong end of the stick? Possibly not, but please, if you can record that as well, that would be great. Thank you.
Mr. Roberts.
Thank you, Councillor Malvaginam. You're referring to the capital programme for the current financial year. I think given the financial challenges facing the council and local government, there is an intention to review the capital programme for this year. That may result in some items being put on hold. It might result in other items being rephased to a different timescale to the one originally proposed. And it might be that some of them are scoped slightly differently once we have fully assessed the viability of those schemes in the current financial climate. As that relates to the current year, the proposal is that will be dealt with through the budget and capital monitoring reports that will be coming forward during the course of this year and isn't part of the budget considerations for next year. Thank you.
So Councillor Malvaginam, you are right in that you and I are both on the Property Investment Working Group, and you know that we've reviewed all of the capital projects and we've given a strong steer to the officers as to what we think they should be reviewed, and no expenditure is on the table right now. Everything's got a pin in it until we've had this review that Mr. Roberts has just talked about. So, but I'm happy for you to respond.
Thank you very much for the answer. That's what I was looking for, because the document is a little bit confusing, because I thought we had put everything on hold and it's got to be continually reviewed. I mean, it's not for me, because there are other councillors who need to understand where we are, because we bought an asset in 2016 that literally we have not done anything with it, and we cannot seem to be moving forward. We are 7th year on now, near enough, coming up to 6 years plus, or 7 years plus. So it is quite disappointing, but I do understand why we have stopped it, because we need to reassess the position. But I think it's incumbent on new leader to explain this properly to other councillors so they are on the same page. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Malvaginam. I'm always reassured that I have you always at my back, making sure that I know what my job is. Okay, and I'll do it to the best of your ability. Okay. All right. Okay, are there any other questions for Councillor Perry on item 7, capital strategy? No? Okay. So members of the executive, we are advised to recommend to full council approval of the capital strategy and associated capital programme covering the period 22-23 to 25-26, which includes small 1, small 2. And we're also advised to note small 1, 2, 3 and 4 as laid out in the paper. Are we agreed? Great. Thank you. Okay. Well done, Councillor Perry and Mr. Watson. Okay, for a change of pace, we have item 8, review of our local council tax support scheme. All right. Where are we? Okay. All right. Councillor Perry. For a brief moment there, I thought it was another councillor. Okay.
I do apologise, Leader.
Councillor Perry.
It's the last one down to me, I think.
It is your last one. Come on.
So Council Tax Support Scheme, the Executive is being asked to consider changes to the local Council Tax Support Scheme. As members will be aware, the scheme is designed to help those residents who need help in paying their council tax. The current scheme has been in place since 2013 and has needed modification for some time. It's very unwieldy. The proposal being made today aims to simplify the administration and ensure that those most in need gain the greatest benefit from the scheme. There are very full details backing up the proposal on pages 94 to 148 on the agenda. And so Executive is asked to recommend that to full council that the amended scheme detailed in Annex A be adopted from the 1st of April 2022.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions on this scheme for Councillor Perry? Okay. I know we've been through this a number of times with this paper, and I'd like to thank again everyone who was on the cross-party working group that put that together. All right. And Mr. Fox for taking us through. You've come to this meeting to answer questions, Mr. Fox, but I think given the fact that we've been through it a number of times, we're probably out of questions. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up, so, okay, as Councillor Perry said, okay, the recommendation, Executive is advised to recommend to full council, small 1, small 2, small 3, as laid out in the paper. Are we agreed? Okay, thank you. Okay. All right. Next item, building control proposed shared working arrangement. Okay. Councillor Page.
Relax. Thank you, Leader. This paper here, and it was interesting listening to what came before about looking at opportunities where we can possibly consolidate and exercise options to save money. So this comes into that bracket. So we're committed to exploring opportunities for greater collaboration with our neighbouring councils to build resilience into our services and bring some efficiencies to it. So the council is building on a strong track record of positive shared working arrangements, including those already in place for family support, refuse collection, recycling, street cleaning, parking enforcement, community services, and those services such as our community transport and meals services. So we've been in discussion with Runnymede Borough Council to establish a shared working arrangement for the building control functions. As the building control manager at Runnymede is due to become vacant, that post of building control manager is due to become vacant, we're having the first stage of a process to creating an overall building control manager that will manage a proposed shared service across the two councils. As you're aware, we do quite a bit of business with Runnymede. It's proposed that the existing Surrey Heath's building control manager will take up this role on a full-time basis, covering both councils. Runnymede Borough Council will contribute 50% of the costs of the building control manager in Surrey Heath. So we are trying to support a shared working arrangement which will actually give us some flexibility on costs. So the additional cost identified in this report under section 7 supports a new structure which will be match funded by contributions from Runnymede and Surrey Heath Borough Council. It's anticipated that the proposed joint service would increase our market share, building and further stability, which would enhance the overall building control service within the two boroughs going forward. And you will know that building control in Surrey Heath is a very, very successful department. So I think Runnymede are kind of looking for us to bolster their service with ours. And of course, further on, we will be looking at the fees that we do for that. So at the moment it's cost neutral, but we anticipate, if you read in the paper further along at section 7, that we think that there might be some benefits for us to go further than cost neutral and actually make some money for us. So the recommendation, members, is that we resolve that the new shared management service with Runnymede Council is implemented and that the new structure for the Surrey Heath Borough Council is agreed. And in the paper you'll see an organisation chart of what that proposed structure looks like. Thank you, Leader.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Page. Any questions for Councillor Page on this paper? Okay. Right, I'm not seeing any. Okay. All right. As you say, Councillor Page, we've got a strong history of working with Runnymede, and it's been good for both councils, and there's no reason to assume that this won't be another good example of co-working. So, as you've said, the recommendation to executive is 2.1. Are we agreed, members? Great. Thank you. Okay. And that brings us to our last item, which is Councillor Page again.
Thank you, Leader. Eyes down looking. We are looking here now at a proposed Surrey Minerals and Waste Local Plan Regulation. Bit of a mouthful, this one. All to do with aggregates and minerals and things that are thrown up geologically that's within Surrey County Council. And it's our response, really, and this will go into our local plan too. So Surrey County Council is preparing a new minerals and waste local plan to replace its existing guidance. Once adopted, the new minerals and waste plan will provide planning policy guidance for development relating to both waste management and the extraction and transportation of minerals. The draft minerals and waste local plan is currently at the Regulation 18 issues and options stage, the consultation stage, if you like, and the report recommends that the executive approves the proposed response for submission to the consultation as set out in Annex 1 of the report. And our officers have been at pains to go through that response and answer the questions and look at the options that we think are the preferred options for us in Surrey Heath. So it represents a series of high-level discussions on various themes relating to minerals and waste management, followed by an outline of broad options seeking to address each issue. And importantly, at this stage, the plan does not seek to identify or allocate any sites for development as such, but it looks at the way that we respond to those things that may come up in the future. So, given the high-level nature of the consultation, the proposed response is also relatively high-level at this stage. It's worth noting that there will be further consultation rounds going forward, and this paper really is to suggest that our proposed response is generally supportive of the aims and objectives outlined in the draft Minerals and Waste Plan, and it broadly aligns with our own objectives within our 5-year strategy. So it's recommended that the proposed response submitted to Surrey County Council as part of the Regulation 18 issues and options consultation is agreed tonight. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Page. And again, does anyone have any questions for Councillor Page or the officers on this paper? Okay. All right. Okay. So, members, we are being asked to as Councillor Page has said, recommendation, Executive is advised to resolve that the response set out in Annex 1 to this report is agreed and is to be submitted to as the Council's formal response to the Reg 18 issues and options consultation on the Surrey Minerals and Waste Local Plan. Are we agreed? Thank you. Okay, that brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you very much, members, for your time. Thank you, members, for joining us online, and thank you, any members of the public. Once again, I apologise that members of the public didn't get to see the presentation, and members, you didn't see all of it, but we will be adding that to the submission or the publication when we put it on the website.